Welcome to the Managing and Implementing Change in the Workplace module. This is an ILM module and is brought to you by Professional Futures. Welcome back to Managing and Implementing Change in the Workplace with me, Marie O'Donnell. With every video, we will start with learning objectives. So by the end of this session, you will be able to explain reasons why organisations continually need to change and identify and define the types of change that you have experienced. Today, changes happen all the time. Once upon a time, it might have been possible for a manager to just keep things ticking along in the way that they always did. But now things are a lot different. For an organisation to remain competitive and to do well, it must accept that change is inevitable. And this means, for you as managers, an essential part of your role is to initiate, plan and implement change. Now, whenever we study management, it's always a good idea to start with a definition of the concept under study. And change is a word we hear all the time, but what does it actually mean? So spend a couple of minutes trying to define the term change. Think about what it means within an organisational context. You may have thought of many definitions for change. Webster's Dictionary offers the following definitions: to make different in some particular way, in other words, to alter something; to make radically different, to transform something; or to give a different position, course or direction. How do these definitions compare to the ones that you wrote? They do start to offer some insight as to what change looks like. Generally, we find that there are 4 types of change that take place in organisations, each one having a corresponding indicative level of threat. If we look more closely at each level, it helps us to see why the threat level is as it is. Starting with incremental type of change. This is typically something that is driven by improvements. For example, maybe we need to change the way that we answer the phones because we've had some complaints from our customers. So we need to rectify and improve the service that we are offering. It's perceived as a low threat level because we just need to learn how to improve our practices. The next type of change is annual, and that's exactly what it says. It's an every year change. For example, changing the financial budgets every year. Again, a low threat level. We know we have to do it every year, so we just get on with it. The third type is step change. This is where we might need to implement new changes in different steps, using different steps or phases. So basically it's an incremental change, but we might implement several new processes or procedures in order to carry it out. And this can be quite significant in terms of threat. People have to learn lots and lots of new processes along the way. They may see that as quite daunting. And equally, if we start to automate some of the sub-processes, they may see that as a threat as well. The fourth type of change is major change or metamorphosis. This is where we have radical changes. So if we go back to the original example of improving our calls, maybe we decide to introduce a fully automated call handling system. Now, as can be appreciated here, the threat level for individuals in the organisation will be perceived as very, very high here, because the way that they may see it is that that could threaten their job security. Over to you. Turn to page 6 in your workbook and complete the activity. If you're not using the workbook, take 15 minutes to consider the types of change that you have experienced in your organisation, and then identify whether they were incremental, step, annual or major changes. Pause the video whilst you complete the activity. By completing the table, You probably identified lots of changes that may have happened as a consequence of factors outside your organisation. These are often known as drivers for change, and we'll look at these shortly. But for now, we're going to look at other ways of defining change, starting with developmental change. This is where we make small changes to the way that we do things just to make gradual improvements and increase our levels of performance and profitability as well. Transitional change is where we move from a period of relatively stable state to a new order. The new order might be radically different though to the way that we did things. So for example, that could be restructuring, downsizing and so on, mergers. This can be very, very uncomfortable for staff, and it can create a high level of turbulence and conflict, anxiety and stress. Transformational change often runs hand in hand with transitional change, but this is where we have radical changes to an organisational culture. It can be very wide-reaching and it can leave us with completely new ways of operating. So for example, we might need to completely transform the way that we work in order to compete with new entrants to the market. China is a good example of this. They are emerging as an industrial powerhouse. They have low-cost labour and they can provide the world market with inexpensive products. Business turnaround is another way to define change. This is when we look at businesses that are really on the road to failure, and if we don't do something about it, it will potentially lead to liquidation. So this usually involves drastic measures to make the company viable again. It could be by reducing costs, it could be by reducing the workforce by redundancies, disposing of any unnecessary assets that we may have, and so on. We might also refinance, but we would have to prove that there would be significant improvements in our performance in order to get that finance. Business restructuring. This is a term that we use to describe a situation where we want to become more profitable by changing the structure of the business. So we might change the business finances, we might even change the ownership of the business or the legal status of the business. And it is the repositioning of the business that will ensure its ongoing viability. And finally, we have business redesign, BPR, or business process re-engineering. The best way to describe BPR is to consider a blank piece of paper. Think like you're starting again. So we can only do BPR if the improvements that we've identified couldn't be achieved through development of existing systems. So we might use BPR if we want to produce efficiency and effectiveness, especially if we want to improve things like quality, if we want to reduce costs or we want to improve response times, and so on. Over to you. Now scan the QR code to read more about BPR. Pause the video whilst you do this. Over to you. Now turn to page 8 in your workbook and complete the activity. If you're not using the workbook, spend the next 10 minutes looking at your organisation and then list potential drivers or reasons for change. Pause the video whilst you complete the activity. There are many drivers for change, as the list shows here. We're just coming out of a financial recession and many organisations have had to make major changes in order to survive. We may be entering into new markets, we may be having changes in strategy, new technology, having to deal with government legislation, especially with the onset of Brexit. Many drivers for change. It is worth noticing though that whilst we have identified these drivers for change, we haven't identified what the actual change will be in order for us to survive, or indeed how we might go about it. For example, if we did have to reduce costs, there are different ways that we could go about that. Maybe we could reduce staffing levels, or maybe we could change the way that we actually do things. We will start to look at this in more detail in video 3. This is an excellent quote, and I think it summarises this session quite nicely. Change doesn't happen by itself. We have to create it and drive it forward if we want to be successful. So, having completed this session, we have met the following learning objectives. You can now explain reasons why organisations continually need to change, and you have identified and defined the types of change that you have experienced. In video 3, we will start to assess the reasons for change in detail. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again in video 3. Visit our website where you can access the full course on managing and implementing change in the workplace. This includes a really useful assignment guide with lots of top tips to help you pass your assignment. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you never miss a new unit. And finally, enjoy watching your next video.